So since then, though, the NFL met again, and they did make some revisions to the Rooney Rule. So what Roger Goodell said was the new rule is going to be that each team has to interview 2 minority candidates for any head coaching vacancy. They have to interview 1 minority candidate for any GM vacancy, and
or
then
like front office, vice president, stuff. Anything like that.
But then they also have to interview at least 1 female for or a female or minority for any senior executive positions as well.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, so that was added, and then they were talking about some of the different programs that they're going to start implementing with these organizations to ultimately help develop these minority coaches so that way they can continue to grow and excel in that field. And the reason I always say minority and not black is because I feel like a lot of people just associate minority with black, but it's so many other ethnicities and genders that need to be included in minority. And that's why I think it's important that we talk about that, because when we just looking at the past 2 years, when we say, oh, it's been only 1 black coach hired, but it's been 2 minorities because obviously Ron Rivera was hired this year. I think that's important that we are inclusive in that regard, because the minorities as a whole are still multiple groups that are not being fairly represented. Mm-hmm. But something that did catch my eye in terms of Roger Goodell and his response to what they agreed upon, they had asked him about the old proposal, the moving up in the draft picks. And obviously Anthony Lynn spoke out about it. A lot of us, me, you, fans, everybody spoke up about their displeasure with it and how disrespectful it seemed. But what Goodell said was they tabled that proposal. They didn't cancel it. And he said they didn't table it due to a lack of voting. He said it received a great amount of support, but they tabled it because sometimes he said that when they're having these discussions, other things come up to make it where it could be potentially better, or they want to review it a little bit more. For me, I'll just talk on that first.
Yeah, keep going. Yeah.
I am a little concerned about just this whole process of how they're trying to improve minority representation in the NFL, whether it's via coaching spots or front office spots. The reason I'm concerned is when we talk about the owners in the NFL, 32 owners, but there's only 1 minority, and that's Shad Khan with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So you're trying to have the individuals who have created this issue. Now they're trying to fix this issue, but they're still not going to have proper representation of the minorities having a say-so in how they should go about fixing it.
Yeah.
So that's my biggest issue, my biggest concern. I mean, you hear Goodell speak on how he doesn't view the proposal as a bad thing. And clearly, if it had support like how he's implying it did, then they didn't see an issue with that either. But when you hear the Anthony Lynn's, the Louis Riddicks, when you hear all these other African Americans or minority people speaking out on their displeasure with it or how they feel it would undermine them, that lets me know that there's a disconnect in terms of what the NFL's intentions are and their method in terms of how the minorities feel it would impact them and not being in a positive way. So I think that's something that they definitely need to look into a lot more to address it in a better way, because you can have the best intentions in the world, but if your method of going about it is flawed, then you're never going to get the results that you truly want to receive.
So you're saying for them just tabling it instead of canceling it altogether? Is that what you mean?
Well, I wouldn't even say they should cancel altogether, but what I think is they need to invite some of these minorities in there to this conversation.
Okay.
You see what I mean? Like, imagine if you're speaking on something that's affected me negatively and you're trying to come up with a solution to it, even though you were the reason why I was affected negatively, but you never ask me.
I'm just speculating.
You're just speculating.
Assuming. Yeah.
So you could come up with, oh man, I think this would be a great idea.
Good intentions and everything. Yeah.
Right. But to me, I'm like, dude, that sucks. I don't want that. But if you never ask me my feelings on it, if you never ask me my input on it, how would you know that? And that's why I say your intention could be great. But if you never have this conversation with me, once you go to implement that thing that you came up with and it's offensive to me, well, now we're either taking no steps forward or we're taking a step backwards. So that's why I think it's important that they do have some of these conversations with minority candidates, with minorities who are already in the NFL, to see just truly how they feel about these different methods and these different proposals.
Okay. Now, with the whole proposal, what did you think of the other 2 parts of it? Did you see it was the one was each team's going to have to come up with a diversity plan
program, yes,
and then write it out and send it in.
Yes,
and I'm sure there will be some type of review process as the year goes on, or at the end of the year, and they'll have to write up another type of proposal of what they're going to do to implement some diversity within their team. What do you think of that? I mean, that's some accountability right there, right? I mean,
you hit it on the head. I love the accountability element of that. I think if you put it on paper, you can't sway from, well, I said this, but this is what I actually meant. When you write it out and you explain it verbatim, now it's okay. This is exactly what we're going to do to promote. This is exactly what
and then it's either you do it or you don't.
Correct. And I think that part is huge because clearly there's an issue. And I feel like when we're talking on these issues in general, you get two crowds. You get the crowd that acknowledges that there's an issue, that there's a flaw, and then you get the guys who are blind to it, or they just want to act like it doesn't exist. And you can act like it doesn't exist all you want in terms of, oh man, every team is going to hire the best candidate. If that was the case, we wouldn't be having this conversation. If that was the case, the owners wouldn't be putting this on themselves. You think the owners want to be viewed this way? No, they wouldn't put that out there, but they understand themselves that, hey, we're looking in the mirror and saying we aren't holding our end of the bargain up. We aren't doing what we said we were going to do when the Rooney Rule was put in place. And when we talk about that, that lets you know that, yes, there is an issue. So for me, I think turning a blind eye to it is not going to make it go away. If something smells, you can cover it up. It's still going to smell. You got to get to the root of the issue. And I think ultimately that's what they're trying to do. That's what this step is. And I think they're headed in the right direction. I think it's something that, first off, you got to admit that, hey, it's an issue. Then from there, now you start troubleshooting, problem solving. How can we get this right? And then from there, you implement it. So this is definitely going in the right direction, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything about the first guideline? I think it was like the increase of the minority interviews for the coaches
and GM spots, yes.
all that type of stuff. What did you think of that? Was there any flaw or anything that you didn't like about that?
No, I was, like I said, compared to what it was initially, where it was only you had to interview one guy, and we talked about how that kind of got, it was more so we already have an agreement in place, but we're just going to interview for the sake of interviewing you. I think in this regard now, you can hope to get away from that, but I still feel that it could go back down that same path, just strictly because when you're just asking to interview somebody, the one or two candidate minimum, I just don't know necessarily how effective that is, because that's similar to what was already in place in terms of being just one guy you had to interview. And since the Rooney Rule has been created, it's only been one team that's been fined for not abiding by that rule of interviewing one minority candidate. That would have been the Detroit Lions when they hired Steve Mariucci without interviewing a minority candidate. But other than that, they've done a successful job in terms of maneuvering around that. But when you look at the past 2 years, 2018, 8 head coaching vacancies, only one minority coach, Brian Flores. When you look at 2019, 5 head coaching vacancies, only one minority candidate they got hired, Ron Rivera. And he was a guy who was already a head coach that same season. He was the Carolina Panthers head coach, got fired in week 10 or 11, and then the Redskins hired him. So even with that, I still don't view that as a new hire or, another minority, because he was already a head coach in the league. But my biggest, issue with it is when we talk about the different rhymes or reasons or excuses in terms of, out of 8 vacancies, the reason why it was just one was, we want a guy with offensive experience or coordinator experience or success or this or that. But when you look at the past 2 years, you've seen guys coming from college who it wasn't like they were at powerhouses, Alabama, Clemson, or anything like that. No, and they weren't even dominating their conference. Let's be real about it. Let's be real. Cliff Kingsbury, even with Patrick Mahomes, he still was having losing seasons. When you look at Mark Rule, they weren't just dominant. It's not like we're talking Dabo Swinney. It's not like we're talking Nick Saban.
Those dudes probably want to stick with where they're at, though.
No, I agree. But, what I mean? I'm just saying, in theory, so when you talk that,
if you brought in Urban Meyer or Lincoln Riley.
Correct. Yeah. That's different. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's one issue. I'm like, okay, well, there's some issues with that. Then when you say, I want a guy with coordinator experience, man, there's guys that got promoted that didn't have coordinator experience. Or when you talk about just experience in general, you look at what happened in Cleveland.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that guy went from quarterback coach, became coordinator for a month or two, and then was head coach all in the span of 6 months. To me, that's crazy. And then you saw how that panned out. And we all can agree that he was not qualified at all for that. And it showed. It showed week in and week out. But for me, I just don't understand why is it that when it comes to minority hires, they need to be overqualified. But when it comes to some of the non-minorities, the qualifications sometimes aren't held to the same standard. And I think that's what the NFL has ultimately said that, hey, man, we need to look into this more. And why the minority people that have represented themselves in terms of coaches and potential GM candidates have spoken out on the issue as well.
That was a good way to put it right there.
Yeah, because I mean, it's different. Like when we talk just coaching hires, how many times have we heard, well, even though this guy hasn't shown that he can win or be successful in the NFL, we're willing to take a chance on him. We're excited about him. Whereas with the minorities, it seems as if they need to be coordinator. They need to already have had success. They need to have a track record that says win, 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 this. And that's where you see the disparity. And that's why obviously the Rooney Rule was created and obviously why they're speaking on it again right now.
Yeah. What did you think? There was a third one and I was kind of confused by it. I didn't really understand. They're going to be opening up the mobility for coaches and
coordinators to interview for different spots. So
is this something that was going on that no one really knew about?
Come on, man. You know they're not going to... You notice even with this coming out, right?
I've heard things of like, this person is in the NFC Championship or going to the Super Bowl. So they're letting him go interview for this job. Yeah. But I haven't heard from
they can
any other type of positions doing that, though.
Yes, they can definitely block you. So essentially what they would do is, say you're my position coach, you're my quarterback's coach, and this team over here wants to interview you for offensive coordinator spot or potential head coaching spot. I can say, you know what? I'm not giving him access. No, he can't interview until the season's over. But during this whole time now, weeks are going by. Obviously every team, they want to get that hire done right away when they get these interviews done so they can finish this process and get their guy in the door. So by me saying, hey, you can't go interview, now you're missing on that opportunity. That does happen a lot. You only hear about it with certain coordinators or certain position coaches. You heard about it a little bit with Flores just because he was with the Patriots. Obviously with Josh Daniels. Excuse me, Josh McDaniels. Yeah, I was gonna say not Josh Daniels, Josh McDaniels. You heard about him, but obviously Patriots. You know what I mean? So that was why, because the playoffs, the conversations around, the excitement around that. But it does happen a lot. So that's why with the new rule saying that, hey, you're not allowed to block these guys anymore, it does open up the door for them to have better opportunities. But I mean, I understand why some of these teams would block, because you would want to say, hey, I want you focused more so on helping us win right now than you looking out for yourself trying to get a job somewhere else. And that part, I definitely can see, that element of it. But at the same time, by you blocking somebody for the team's own good, you're ultimately hurting that person in terms of giving them opportunity to go in and advance and excel in their career field.
Yeah. So overall, what do you think? I like the diversity plan. You write up your statement or whatever, and we're going to do this, and this, and then the accountability factor. I kind of like that. I don't really see too much downside there. I think, like you said earlier, at least this whole thing's a step in the right direction. Absolutely. Especially compared to what we were talking about last week.
Oh, man. Absolutely, man. I agree 100%.
I don't think there's too much downside to what was laid out here in the new plan.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's a step in the right direction. I don't want to say this is a lateral step. I do say it's a step forward. So that is good in that regard. But I do still think that it is going to need to be revised and looked into a lot more, simply because there isn't enough minority representation in these conversations to truly understand what they are feeling or what they think is the biggest issue. So until that happens, I feel like you're always going to have a flaw in this intent, this action. I think it's always going to have something missing in that regard.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I was reading it. They have talked to certain groups,
they
right?
Have an agency that they're working with.
But that's different than talking to the actual coaches and the actual people that are in the NFL.
Because the owners, they're in the NFL. They're speaking from their personal experience. But now when they speak to the minorities, they're not talking to minorities directly. They're talking to an agency that is supposed to speak on behalf of minorities. But these agencies, they're not in it. They're not living it. So how can they fully represent these minorities? That's the issue.
Yeah.
So that's why I say for me personally, to feel more comfortable with it. And I think for them to take the best steps forward, you need to talk to the actual minorities who are in it, who are living it. The Lewis Riddicks, the Anthony Lynn's, the Mike Tomlins, the Marvin Lewis's, the Lovie Smiths. Like, speak to them directly, get their input directly. Guys who have had success, guys who've been washed out of the league as well. I mean, I think that it's important to hear their perspective and not just solely 31, non-minorities and then just one minority voice in an agency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.